Shabbat Shalom. On the 18th of July, 2002, I observed Tisha B'Av for the first time. 2 weeks before, the North London Jewish community had been shattered by the news that Andreas Hintz, a second-year rabbinical student at Leobeck College, had been murdered in the most barbaric way. Andreas was kind and gentle and bookish and unselfish and funny, which made his death all the more impossible to take in. My whole community collapsed into shock. Whether we had known him deeply or a little or only by name, we came together to mourn Andreas. We prayed for him. We wept for him. We sang psalms for him. We reached out to his family to hold them in their grief and their utter incomprehension. And when Tisha B'Av arrived, we became vessels for pain, full of bewilderment and anger and the sense of the utter grotesque wrongness of what had been inflicted upon him and his family and our community and the world that would never now know him as a rabbi. Ever since then, that embodied practice is the signature of Tisha B'Av for me. And tonight, it begins again. Tonight and tomorrow, the one day of the Jewish year that we give our bodies over to devastation. On Tisha B'Av, we stop eating and drinking. We don't wash. We aren't intimate. We don't wear leather shoes. Long ago, all of us went barefoot on this day. Our teachers used to begin the fast with 1 gulp of water and 1 crust of bread, and would sit on the floor between the oven and the stove. All this to indicate that on Tisha B'Av, we look back on our story through the lens of Churban. Churban means destruction and devastation and ruin all at once. It is a word with a sword in its heart. We list out the massacres, the sieges, the destruction of the temples, the merciless sweep of the Crusades, the horrors of pogrom and Shoah, letting those words step in for language we cannot even begin to articulate as we slump to the ground under the trauma of memory. We are not even allowed to turn to Torah study for comfort. But Tisha B'Av is not only about our own pain. Our teachers in the 8th century Masechet Sofrim write, quote, "The reader of IKAR, Lamentations, on the 9th of Av says, Baruch Dayan Emet, blessed is the true judge. Some place the Torah scroll on the ground in a black wrapping and say the crown is fallen from our head. The reading and the lamentations are carried out as with a person whose dead lie before them. Whose dead lie before them." This is the text that unlocks how we must observe Tisha B'Av this year. Why say the blessing, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, which we know as a blessing said at a graveside? Because the leader, traditionally whose head is bare, who is smeared in ashes, whose clothes are crumpled, who is weeping and wailing, must lead us with those words into the landscape of death. Why place the Torah on the ground? Because none of our wisdom will serve us today. Nothing is in its proper place. This is not a day for rationalizing and arguing and explaining things away. Instead, we contemplate the darkness of what humanity is capable of creating, and we allow it to enter us. Why the analogy of our dead lying before us? Because this terminology has special halachic weight. At the time between a death and a funeral, the dead have absolute priority. Nothing else matters. On Tisha B'Av this year, our dead are lying before us. Notice what comes to mind as you envisage this. It arrives in waves. The atrocities of October the 7th, the hostages and their pain, our families, our Palestinian neighbors, the bomb shelters, everything we have been lifting up over and over again for 2 years, stretching our hearts and our souls and our imaginations to encompass this pain. And now, and in the foreground, the bodies of the Gazan children and the sunken eyes of their starving parents. And this year, somehow, we must also stretch our hearts to bear witness to them. Our temporary, elective refraining from food must be directed towards their suffering. Can we even begin to stretch our hearts yet wider than they are already stretched? We don't have a choice. Tisha B'Av itself decrees that we must. Here is one more embodied Tisha B'Av practice, now lost in a midrash, but no less powerful for that. All 40 years the children of Israel were in the desert, a herald would go out every Erev Tisha B'Av and proclaim, "Everyone go and dig yourselves a grave." And everybody did. And they would sleep in the graves they had dug. And the next morning, the herald would go out again and proclaim, "Let the living separate themselves from the dead, and those with the spirit of life in them would rise." We know that Tisha B'Av had not been invented at the time the Israelites were in the desert. That's not the point. The point is that rising from the grave symbolizes the power to act, and we must act. Our pain, our temporary hunger and our thirst, our outrage that this is our reality, this must break us open. We must bear witness to the ones who cannot rise. So here are some practices for us this year. We will begin by coming together. Together we will sit and weep and lament and tell over all the brokenness. We will mourn the Chorban across time and space in its old and its new iterations. Nobody can do that alone. It's too enormous. We do it together. Please come. Please be with us, even if you have never sat for Tisha B'Av before. And tomorrow, our fasting bodies will be an immediate physical reminder to surge aid into Gaza. I hope that everyone saw our email yesterday. I hope that everybody noticed those links. We can use technology on Tisha B'Av. It's not Shabbat. So here is an invitation. Every time you feel a pang of hunger or thirst, pull up the email and join the international Jewish drive to get the food to those who need it most. We must not, in good conscience, read accounts of children starving tonight and not act tomorrow. And even with everything that we see, we must keep the unseen in view. The Torah that is wrapped in black. As we activate our collective memory, we must remember the continuing torture of the hostages and their families. For nearly 2 years, languishing in the terror of uncertainty, and as I imagine it, as if they were lying in their graves, underground, unseen. We must use our eyes well this Tisha B'Av. We must find them in the ever-expanding darkness, where even they cannot see. I want to end where I began, with Andreas. After his funeral, we were left wondering how to create meaning from our grief and our outrage. And we held memorial gatherings and things were dedicated in his name, but it wasn't enough. We wanted a real thing to do. And this became to get the government to compensate his bereaved mother for her loss. It took us years to chase it down. We navigated layer upon layer of bureaucracy. We helped her fill in endless forms and answer sheaves of letters. We had to make a separate hardship application halfway through because the process was taking too long. And it was sometimes hard to remember that she was entitled to this money, that in any case was never going to come anywhere near to compensating her for the true extent of her loss. But we kept going. We kept going because this was a way to act for him and for her. We kept going because Andreas was still lying before us, and we bore witness, and we held on to our pain and our outrage, and we are changed forever because of him. What will you do this Tisha B'Av? How will you make yourself a sacred container for devastation? How are we going to rise for those who cannot rise? Tonight, it begins. I wish us a meaningful Tisha B'Av. Shabbat Shalom.